What is an IEP? It's an individual education plan or program for a specific student. What else? Why do we have IEPs? It's a plan and a guarantee by IDEA that every student has that free, appropriate public education. And so that's what we want to see when we go to your schools, that every student, regardless of their disability, is able to access that free, appropriate public education. So we know that when you get back to your schools and you start setting up systems, you know that all your IEPs or ARDs have to be conducted annually. However, there's some times when you have to go back to ARD. And so some of the times that I want to bring to your attention is specifically when you see a lack of expected progress toward the goals. When you go into the next session, they're going to show you how to monitor your teachers if they're taking data on the goals. And so when you see that that student isn't making progress, what are you going to do? There's also a time when maybe a student has to be reevaluated. So we know reevaluation happens every 3 years. However, there may be times that you may ask for additional assessments. Maybe you're working with a student and they're a speech-only kid, but you're like, I think this child might have a reading issue. Let's do another evaluation. Then we would want to come back and look at that information. If the parent requests it, and then if you see, again, like if there's any anticipated needs. One thing I do want to bring to your attention is not only when a student is not making progress on their IEP, but what happens when you get that grade report, the report card, and you notice that that child has a failing grade? Are you at your school putting those systems in place to say, okay, at report card time and looking at the progress, how did all of my students that have IEPs, how did they do? Did they pass? Are they making progress? And then if they're not, do we need to come back to an ARD meeting and discuss why and possibly revise that individualized education program? So we know we want to meet those annual timelines, but there's also other things that come up during the year that you may have to look at. Now I'm going to turn it over to Mary Kay, and she's going to talk about eligibility.
All right, so you've been through the referral process with a student. The student is evaluated by an educational diagnostician, a school psychologist, a speech language pathologist, or any combination of those professionals. And they determine that they meet disability criteria. So we have those 13 disability criteria there in our brain. But eligibility for special education is different. We're looking at the distinguishing between disability and eligibility. Eligibility is a two-pronged process. Number one, does the student qualify as a student with a disability according to the evaluation process? But the second one is based on educational need. Does the student require specially designed instruction in order to meet what the gentleman here said is we have to provide faith. So are we providing that free and appropriate public education, and is it does specially designed instruction required for that student to receive faith? So just because the evaluation says yes, they meet the criteria for another health impairment or ADHD, it is up to the ARD committee to determine, does that student meet eligibility for special education services? Any questions about that? Because I know that sometimes is a tricky process for ARD committees. We're looking at distinguishing between disability and eligibility. All right, I've got the GT group here. All right, dyslexia. I know dyslexia has been a hot topic for several years, and I know that we're also in the middle of changes for dyslexia. I don't know how many of you get those TEA notifications, but we did get a new dyslexia handbook that was posted. It's finally approved. So on June 30th, the new dyslexia manual became posted as the final manual on TEA website. So we did provide a link to that. So there are some additional requirements when we suspect dyslexia. So when we're looking at dyslexia, we have those additional requirements. How many of you have seen that form? And I know it's really small there on the right-hand side. And how many of you have seen that form? All right. That is a form that should be utilized anytime we're suspecting dyslexia as a disability. So if you'll take a look at the top there, you'll see the TEC pieces for that. If HISD suspects or has a reason to suspect a student has dyslexia, and maybe a student with a disability under IDEA, and dyslexia now falls under learning disability, a specific learning disability, including after those reading diagnostic assessments. Remember, we have those screeners and we have assessments. There are 3 additional steps that we have to go through. We have to provide the parent with that form, which explains the process, what is the special education, and what are special education services. We have to adhere to all of the guidance that's in the dyslexia handbook, and it was posted on the 30th, which means on the 30th, that becomes the guidance for us. So we have some reading and studying to do. And if the student is to be evaluated for dyslexia or any related disorder, we have to evaluate in all areas of suspected disability. So it's really important as you're working with your intervention assistance team to ensure that you're looking at all areas of suspected disability. So you get those screener results. They come back and a student is flagged. We're really concerned about a student. Well, one of the things that we really need is we need those teachers to then pull together and say, you know what? Yes, they're struggling in reading and it's impacting the written expression as well. So they're having trouble writing, but they also are struggling in math. So it's really important that we're building that comprehensive story based on data so that when you're referring a student, you're bringing in all of those things. Or it could be a student who's having some behavioral difficulties. So we need to make sure that we're looking at everything. Sometimes those behavioral difficulties overshadow the academics and you're not sure. But if you have a student by the time you're in middle school, we're a data-rich district. If you have a student who has been failing reading assessments year after year, not meeting expectations, going to summer school, they're also a behavior problem, don't discount that dual diagnosis. We may have a behavioral disability, associated disability, but we also may have an academic achievement disability. And many times, those are the things that come together when they're in middle school. We've tried this, it didn't work. Oh, wait a minute. We didn't try this. We didn't look at academics. So we need to make sure we're looking at both things. So instructional implementation. We know with dyslexia, there are required minutes of service for a student. So we have to make sure that we have a provider of dyslexia instruction on your campus. Now, many of you have a lot of students with dyslexia on your campus, right? We're not looking at 10 or 15. So you have to look at your students, your master schedule, and making sure that you have adequate staff to be able to fulfill the need of the students. So I'll ponder this question. If a student is in special education and has dyslexia, does the provider of dyslexia instruction have to be a special ed certified teacher? No, they do not. A provider of dyslexia instruction can be either a general education or a special education teacher. They have to have the training. So looking ahead, it gives you a little bit of information about the certificate. What are the 2 programs in HISD that we utilize for dyslexia? Reading by Design or Esperanza? in Spanish.
We do have a few outliers. I think somebody said, I think we have a few kids transitioning out of, I think, Wells or Newhouse. Nyhouse.
They were sprinkling.
So we, but for the most part, it's reading by design and Esperanza. So, you know, just make sure that you have a teacher, whether it's a special ed or general ed teacher, that's trained in that.
So the teacher has to, what if the teacher's under a waiver? It has to be a teacher that's certified, or can it be a teacher that's under a waiver?
Can you repeat the question? That's a great question.
The question was, can I use a teacher that's on a waiver? The teacher has to have a certification. So I would say steer away from that and utilize certified teachers, either certified general ed teachers or certified special ed, either one.
Got it.
Stacey, has guidance been provided for any of those campuses on how to provide what the timing is going to look like? Because I know I've been on vacation, so maybe that's changed in the last couple of weeks. But.
We do have some guidance to make sure that we throw that into our next section on some possible schedulings, backing it up to the intervention and an elective, I think is what. Let me look at that. And I'll add it to the next slide. The question was, what is the guidance for scheduling for dyslexia and NES? And so I'll throw that guidance into the next session, so you'll have that.
What about staffing? Is that staffing?
So when we staffed for special education this year, we looked at your dyslexia numbers. And one of our executive team members that's not here with us today because she's doing reading by design training with a group of teachers, and we wanted to make sure she was there, is Ebony James. Ebony James is going to be the executive director of she is the executive director of special ed that's going to really support curriculum and instruction, which is going to include dyslexia. Some of you may have interacted with her before because was our CTM. And so she's taking that work over, and so that will be your contact. However, when we looked at the allocations at your campus, when we prepared for this coming year, we reviewed your numbers for dyslexia services. And we staffed your special ed number to provide dyslexia services. Now, if you are NES and you had more than 26, then we're going to give you someone from our district, which will be assigned this week, to support that, okay? So that's how that's going to work, okay? Yes?
Question regarding training, how often do you offer the training?
We're offering it this week, but we offer it monthly, and it is 5 days. And I know I've called and I've tried to say I need my teachers in the classroom, all the things, but Region 4 doesn't budge on that. They're very strict on the training and the implementation. So it is a 5-day training.
All right. So having that provider of dyslexia instruction is important not only to the students who are receiving that instruction, but also to the evaluation and the ARD process. So that provider of dyslexia instruction is also a member of the evaluation team when dyslexia is being considered. So why is that? Because they're the experts in dyslexia. While our evaluators can give tests, a lot of students, they fall in the middle. You know, they don't quite qualify, but if you have compelling data that supports the need for dyslexia instruction, that provider of dyslexia instruction is going to be able to bring that to the table, talk with the evaluation team and say, hey, I have all of this data that supports the need. And then that's what kind of drives them over to, okay, then they meet criteria. It's not just about sitting and taking a test with an evaluator. It's also that compelling data. These students have been in school for years. So we have to not discount that for the 1 day or 2 days that they're sitting there with an evaluation specialist. So that provider of dyslexia instruction is a part of the evaluation team. They bring that data to the table to review. And additionally, they also are a part of the ARD committee. These are required participation things. So you have to have that provider of dyslexia instruction, and they'll call them PDI, as a part of those things.
I just kind of want to stamp what Mary Kay just said. As we're transitioning, because a lot of our students are still under that 504 umbrella and they're going through this process this year, we have to get everyone transitioned by the end of this school year by law. We would like to do it before then, but by law, we have to have everyone who is going to be evaluated by the end of this school year. And so as you go back and you look at your students who are currently being served under 504, then they would get that information from that first slide about the evaluation, and if the parent signs off on consent. So if they're under 504 for dyslexia, then we have to offer them an opportunity to be evaluated. They will only be able to receive reading by design and Esperanza, etc., if they are now under an IEP. So we have this year to transition to that. So right now it's going to be kind of confusing because you're going to have kids in both groups right now. But by the end of the year, everyone who is going to be under the special education umbrella should have been evaluated and have an ARD for that. The biggest questions that we're getting, and I know Mary Kay said this, but I'm going to just say it again because these are the things that come to our office. And it's okay, call us. Like if you're not sure, call us. We're here to support you. But we're kind of used to hearing that evaluator say, okay, they qualify for this or they don't. But there is that gray area where you can bring that data and say, I think this supports this, and make a determination as an ARD committee meeting. And so this is something that's occurring. This is something that administrators, quite frankly, are calling because they're not comfortable with this because it's new, right? And so we're just here and ready and willing and able to talk you all through that process as you need it. So definitely tap into us to help you get ready for those conversations, okay?
I have a question.
Yes.
Provided that the parents deny or decline, do we need to keep the service plan or we have to create an IEP?
The question was, if the parent declines, do we keep a service plan or the IEP? Well, remember, this student is currently under 504, so they have a 504 plan. They should have a 504 plan. I'm coming to the ARD committee and I'm saying, okay, Ms. Smith, your child is being served under 504 with dyslexia. We're here to offer you an evaluation. That parent has to sign off on consent for the evaluation, okay? If they sign off on consent, we go through the ARD process, the evaluation and ARD process just like any other student. If they don't sign off on the consent, then we need to make sure they understand that they can still be under the 504 umbrella and receive accommodations, because we're not saying that the child doesn't have dyslexia. It's just a matter of, are they going to be served under 504 or do they need specially designed instruction in special education? And so really going, if they say, no, I don't want my student to be evaluated, okay, that's fine. We need to go back to the 504 committee, make sure that that plan is what that child truly needs, But they also need to know that that child will not receive reading by design or Esperanza or any of the other specially designed instruction for that program. So that's the big takeaway. Okay, I'm gonna go back a little bit because I feel like y'all need to probably talk with your elbow partner about this and what does that mean. What are your next steps? Getting this information, what are your next steps when you go back to your campus? Just take a couple of minutes. All right, if you all will come back to center, we have someone, a brave volunteer, on what they're going to share.
We were just going to follow up on making sure that the students who are under 504 and still fall under dyslexia, to make sure we get all of them through the process of being evaluated, whether the parent agrees or not, and get that process going.
Okay. So she's going to go back and look at her 504 students who have dyslexia and make sure we get those scheduled. Just a little feedback. Last year we had 4,500 initial evaluations in special education. And we, I think out of that 4,500 number, we had 3 that evaluators missed, 2 that we missed timelines on for evaluations, and then 9 where campuses missed initial ARDs. The year before, we missed initial ARDs by 515 ARDs. So give yourself a round of applause because y'all did this by getting your schedules together and things like this. So just be thinking, do not go back and go, okay, I got 5 kids that need to be evaluated and I need them all done on this one date, because you're going to kill Mary Kay and team your diags. So spread them out. That's what I would say, is spread them out. Don't do them all at once. Spread them out. Any kind of guidance you want to provide?
Sure. Think about need, right? You have kids that are, they've been struggling. We really, we take these as urgent cases and start there. The other thing, as Ms. Vinson said, yes, your evaluation staff is going to be drinking from a fire hose, but so is your department chair. Because you got to think about, and so are your teachers, because every evaluation that starts on the same day has to have an ARD by the same day, and then has to start services the same day. So think about it, we want to make sure that we're kind of looking and prioritizing referring kids throughout the year, not waiting until, the end of the first semester or right before October count. Let's make sure that we're looking at them throughout the year and prioritizing those students with the greatest need.
So that was one of my questions. This year we ran into the problem where our kids were not getting tested in time, which took us out of compliance because we only, one person was servicing 5 or 6 campuses, and we're not able to get that testing done. So is there something that's going to be done? Is it specific, they maybe have 1 or 2 schools versus 7 or 8? I just kind of want to see that because we had some issues with that.
Well, we really don't have more staff, right? So it really is about organization, and if there's a specific problem, let us know. We've had some staff turnover in the evaluation land. Some people have moved on, some people have retired, so we do have some new folks coming in. We do have more speech pathologists coming on board. So let me know, reach out to me specifically if you have a concern, and let's get it addressed this summer before we start, because it's all about the preparation beforehand.
And once they sign that consent, that clock starts ticking on our end, on your end. So, just prioritize by the most need. Students with the most need. Okay, how many of you, when you go to your ARD meetings, either project the ARD up on the projector and or provide your ARD committee's drafts of the ARDs? Awesome. Would definitely encourage that, because as you, the administrator of your campus, and the things that we're looking for, and the things you're going to be taught today, as looking at your goals and objectives and the student's present level of academic achievement, these are things that you will need to know, at least in a high-level overview. And of course, your division staff is there to help you as well. However, we know that the IEP has to be developed during the meeting. Now, that doesn't, your school may draft the components, but when you get in the ARD, parents, teachers, administrators should be able to see that whole ARD, because I'm going to tell you, in a former life, I had teachers that might not have anything written in those paperwork and could talk through a great ARD and never have anything written down. And so you're looking at me, this is not a made-up story. I wish it was. But we have teachers that can do that. And so, you know, as the administrator, you want to make sure that they're drafting this ARD prior to that ARD meeting. They should have some type of draft. Then when you get into that ARD meeting, you're having those discussions and you're actually finalizing in that ARD. Now, sometimes you have really critical cases, maybe something that you need to have a staffing on. And so a staffing is separate from an ARD meeting. You do not make decisions in a staffing meeting. We can say, I think we'll take these proposals to the ARD committee, but we can't say, oh, Ms. Smith, your son's going to the BSC because we already talked about this yesterday. That cannot happen. Okay? So a staffing is where we as a group, and parents sometimes attend the staffing as well, talk about what are some options that could happen. Maybe we need more knowledge at the table to provide feedback and say, okay, well, I could possibly do this, or we could possibly do these things. But that doesn't become an individualized education program until we get into that ARD meeting and people sign off on consensus. It has to be held at a mutually agreeable time. We have to give our parents an opportunity, and we have to record the attempts that we made to include the parents. So, multiple attempts to include our parents. Yes.
On those attempts are in the form of an ARD invitation that is generated in Easy IEP and sent to the parent. While phone calls are great, we need at least 3 attempts. And if you get 3 attempts written where you've tried to schedule with the parent, what are you to do? Proceed. You have the meeting without them. Okay? Those are 3 attempts in writing in Easy IEP, not just phone calls.
Questions about that? This is something that is part of our exit criteria for TEA, is that our parents are notified of meetings, that they receive their students' progress, all of those things that we're talking about today. If we get these things in place, then eventually we'll be able to transition out of conservatorship, okay? Just remember, like we already kind of touched on this, when it's an initial evaluation, the parent has to sign off on that. We have to make sure that the parent has a voice in the ARD. And then, you know, of course, our parents are equal partners. And then as a district, we say what we're going to notify our parents at least 10 days prior to the ARD meeting. Federal law says 5, but as a district, we said we will notify 10 days in advance. In your handouts, and then this is also in the resources on your last, is you're going to have an administrator's ARD checklist. I would keep a hold of that. That's very a handy document of kind of what are the do's and don'ts during that ARD meeting. Who comes to the ARD meeting? So these people in blue are the people that have to be there. You have to have that parent or adult student. You have to have a general ed teacher, a special ed teacher, and then you, campus administrator, are the LEA representative. And then if you are looking at an evaluation, then we would have someone who can speak to those results, like a diagnostician, a speech pathologist, a school psychologist. Now, these people in purple are kind of dependent based on the students. And so you have to look at, of course, if we're looking at a student who's in transition, or you have a student that maybe has a lot of needs. Maybe they have a counselor outside of school, or they have a social worker that the parent wants to bring in so that we can have a really comprehensive plan, then that would be someone like an agency representative. An LPAC member, so everybody who, if you have a student who is emergent bilingual, then you have to have someone who is an LPAC member. And then career technology for our students who are in that middle school and up, have to, if you're being considered, or if you're in a CTE pathway, then we have to have a representative for career technology. And then the dyslexia provider. We spend a lot of time on that. The next pieces are our visually impaired teacher, if we have a student who has a visual impairment, a hearing impairment. If you're going to the JJAEP, have a disciplinary, then of course you're going to invite them. And then early childhood, if it's a little bitty and you have, then you would invite the early childhood rep. In there, you're going to, in that slide, you have a link to a handout for dual ARD membership. And so who can play a dual role in an ARD, meaning that they can have one or more of those roles up there? The question was, can my CTE and my general ed person be the same? And the answer is no. It has to be different. There's really only two people that can play a dual role that are up there. The LPAC person can be what?
Maybe a teacher, an administrator, or teacher.
It can be a general ed teacher or a special ed teacher. The administrator, if you're going to be the LEA representative, you're the administrator, you cannot be the LPAC rep. Okay? Great questions, because this, trust me, I monitored for the state, and people get dinged on this all the time because it's very confusing. There's only two roles. And the general ed and the special ed teacher can both play that LPAC representative. Now, on your dyslexia person, if you have a special educator that is going to be in that dyslexia role, they could sign off on both of those. Let's talk about your role as the LEA rep. So in Houston ISD, the LEA rep has to be an administrator, either you or an assistant principal at your school. Your department chair cannot be the LEA rep. It has to be an administrator. And you say, why, Benson? Because it says you have to be qualified and you have to be able to supervise the provision of specially designed instruction. So you or your admin team are have the supervisory role. You also have to be knowledgeable about the general ed curriculum. Well, you wouldn't be in this seat if you weren't. And then, of course, you have to be knowledge about the availability of resources, meaning that you can allocate resources if needed. So let's say if you were going to do this, you would need a staffing prior to, because you'd need to talk to somebody. But let's say a kid really had some really significant behavior needs and you needed maybe some more support, either like you wanted to buy a program or you may need an additional staff member to support this kid, that kind of thing. Then we would talk about that, and then if needed, we could possibly allocate that in an ARD. But if you're going to do that, you should be talking to somebody in this room prior to sitting in that ARD meeting, okay? I do want to touch on this. We're going to talk about least restrictive environment. If you're going to a more restrictive environment, meaning they're leaving your campus or maybe they're leaving your district, again, that should be something that we have a discussion about before you go into ARD to talk about the process, okay? So those types of things we would have a staffing on. All right, so turn to your table partner and talk about how are you going to go back to your campus and ensure, as I'm scheduling, that I have all my people that I need in that ARD committee. It'll take 2 minutes. Let's go in because now we're going to get into actually, you've kind of organized. You got the parent there. You got everybody who's coming to the ARD committee. Now you're in that ARD, and now you're digging into the present levels of academic performance and your goals and objectives. I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Kennett so she can go over that with you. This is a really big part when we do your folder reviews of quality IEPs. We're looking at your PLAF, and we're looking at your goals and objectives for your students to make sure that they meet these requirements. So we're going to give you some samples to look at so that you're able to provide some feedback to your teachers when they draft those goals.
All right, looking at the present levels, one of the things that we need to make sure is this is updated at least annually. So what I shouldn't see is a 7th grader that says Johnny is a 3rd grade student, right? And the reason sometimes that happens is because it carries over from Easy IEP, right? But it is the job of the case manager or department chair to update that information. Again, going back to present levels of academic. So also, we want to make sure that we're really focusing on what are those strengths, what are the needs of the students, and we're including information from the parent, especially when we're looking at a reevaluation. When reevaluation time happens for a student, those parents are filling out all those rating forms and all the information. Get some information from the evaluation team. That parent needs to be embedded in those present levels. Okay? Questions on present levels. That should tell the story about the student. Should tell how are they doing academically, how are they doing behaviorally, socially, whatever might be of concern for that student. We're describing what are the strengths, what are the needs, and what are we going to do. So, looking at measurable annual goals, there are 4 key components here, and you see them in the goal. The time frame, the condition, the behavior, and then the criterion. Why is this important? Thinking about that last one, the criterion. We're going to go through some examples. I think there'll be an easier way to look at this. So take a look at this chart here. We have an example. So you have your time frame. Identify the amount of time that the goal is going to be completed. And here's an example. By the end of the 4th 9 weeks grading period. So a lot of times that'll be the beginning of the cycle of the goal. By the end of the 3rd grading cycle. The condition. This specifies how progress toward the goal occurs. Given a hundreds chart or number line or set of mixed coins totaling up to $1, Start to see how this flows. And then the behavior. It identifies the performance that is being monitored. What action? Claudia, a second grader, will correctly count the total value. And then the criterion. It identifies how much, and this one is so important on progress monitoring. How often or to what level the behavior must occur to demonstrate that the goal has been achieved. In 4 out of 5 trials for mastery. It is essential that this process is followed for progress monitoring, which is required. Think about this. You're a parent, you're sitting at an ARD meeting, and it says 4 out of 5 trials for mastery for their child, and the teacher comes time, okay, how are they doing in written expression? I know that they were working on a narrative. How are they doing right now? Well, they're at about 34%. 4 out of 5 trials, 34%, and the parent is going, could you tell me how you got there? The math ain't mathin', right? So we have to make sure that the maths, right? So if there's 5 trials and they've done 1, then we're going to be at 20%. All right, let's make it easy on ourselves, and we really want to drive this home with our teachers this year because they're making it more difficult on themselves to be able to monitor. So this is going to be a key takeaway for them as well during Job Alike. Now, objectives, those short-term objectives, those are required when students are on the alternate curriculum. Why? We have to break things down more. That big overarching goal isn't going to be enough. We need to look at those incremental things that a student must do in order to achieve the big goal. So think about that. Just as the teaching for a student who may have an intellectual disability or has a significant disability, you have to break things down. That's what we have to do in the goal. We have to break it down into those achievable objectives. So, let's take a look. We're going to fly through this real quickly. We're going to read each goal and determine if it's measurable and attainable. Can I have somebody read the first one?
By the end of the third 9 weeks grading period, given a visual schedule and 1 verbal prompt to transition from his classroom to other locations in the school, including the gym, band room, art room, and cafeteria, Nico will safely walk to and from locations on the second school campus and his classroom, arriving at the designated location within 5 minutes.
All right, is it measurable? Yes, okay. Is it attainable? Do we think by the end of the third 9 weeks we could get a student there? Right? All right, let's flip to the second one. By the end of the first grading period, given a hundreds chart or number line and a set of mixed coins totaling up 75 cents, Claudia will correctly count the total of 5 out of 5 trials. Is it measurable? It is measurable. Is it attainable? It could be, but
Still not.
it might be a little more difficult. By the end of the first grading cycle, have we introduced coins? Have we started counting money? I mean, there's a lot of steps that would need to be before we get to that point. So that's something that we need to consider. Is it attainable in the time frame that we stated? So good catch there.
Just tagging on to goals and objectives, that goal has to be something that a student would be able to achieve in a year. So when Mary Kay talks about the attainable, we're looking at that annual goal, meaning it should be something that student would be able to achieve by the end of that school, or by that next ARD committee meeting. Accommodations and modifications, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I do want to point out a resource for you, Accommodations Central. There's a link there. So if your teachers need, they'll receive the same resource, but if you're needing a resource to find out accommodation for your students, that's great. And that could be used for IAT as well, or in 504 plans, some of these accommodations. So it's just a great resource to have. The big thing that I will say about accommodations is that you need to they need to be individualized to the student. hence the I in IEP, individualized. So making sure that we're not throwing just everything under the sun at the student, because again, it puts you and your staff in a predicament as well. So if I say you need oral administration, but you really don't need it, and y'all are starting to deal with kids at an age where they're like, Miss, I don't need that, I don't need that. And they'll tell you they don't need that. And so do they really need it in order to access the curriculum? And so if they do, then we'll check the box for the accommodation. But once you check that box, then it has to be implemented in that classroom. So we want to make sure the boxes that we're checking, because I'm going to tell you, as a former special educator, I was guilty. I'm like checking everything. Oh, my baby needs all this stuff. And I'm like, they really don't. So really that goes back to that present levels and how are they performing in the classroom. What are they using? What are they not using? And it's okay if you need to add or take away. It's an annual ARD. You look at it annually and say, you know what? He did need oral administration last year, but he's not needing it this year. And make those decisions. State testing decisions. I'm going to kind of fly through this, but you know, we have our local test as well as our state test. So once you look at that student's performance, you all are going to make a determination in that ARD committee on how they will participate. Now, we know unless you're really in the alt curriculum, we really want you to be able to participate in all of these tests. Again, it's about the least restrictive environment. It's also about gathering data, because my student may not perform so well on the NWEA map, but we want to see them grow, right? So really looking at how is that student performing and making that determination in that ARD committee and what tests that they're taking. I do want to take a minute because STAR Alt participation requirements changed actually last year. And so in your handout, you have the STAR Alt participation requirements. I copied them for you. So when you look at, it should look like this. So if you want to grab that, I want to bring your attention. The first one is just on step 1. If a student has, these are set by the state. So you can say, Ms. Vincent, I don't like this. Well, I'm sorry, but this is what our state gives us. It's really not arguable, or we can't change it. So number 1, if a student is has a specific learning disability, they do not qualify for STAR Alt if that's their only disability. That stops it at no right there. So, some of y'all are like, oh no. The second one is if a student is speech only. That's a no. You get to stop right there. But then, let's say they're not. Let's say they're OHI, have an intellectual disability. So we're moving on to step 2. So you have to look at each one of these criteria in column 1 and column 2. And you have to determine where the student is at in each one of those columns. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to read through those. So I know it's a lot, but the thing that I want you to take away from this is your third question. It's a yes if all the criteria are marked in column 2. If you mark one or more criteria in column 1, it's a no. So I'm just saying, we probably have some kids on STAR Alt right now that don't belong there based on this new criteria. So this is something that As you go back to your campus, you definitely, again, your teachers are going have received this training. They're going to receive it again. But as you're in those ARD meetings, you're coming with your toolbox, and as you're making these decisions, then you'll notice the last thing is you have to sign off on it as the administrator, like that. This is the decision we're making. So, you know, do it with ethics and fidelity, right? Based on the training that you received. All right, we're speeding through this. Least restrictive environment. So, as you're looking at your students, now you're in this meeting, you've created PLAFs, you've created goals and objectives, and now you made a testing decision. And now you're like, okay, where is this student going to be served at? Remember that students with IEPs are general education students first. So what does that mean? I have access to everything else that general education students have unless the ARD committee determines that there's a need for them not to participate in something, okay? So looking at the least restrictive is you're in general ed with with no supplementary aids or services. But then you go into those special education settings. And you go into, of course, we want to start out with general ed with supplementary aids and services. So accommodations, modifications in that general education classroom. This is not disability driven, meaning if I have autism, I go straight to self-contained. That's not how this works. You are looking at those present levels, you are deciding what the student's need is, and then you're determining based on the least restrictive environment, meaning you start with the least restrictive first. Can they be successful in the gen ed setting with support? If not, then do they need to maybe go to a resource class to receive some math support? I got to have a teacher that's certified. I'm pulling them out. This is now a special education setting, so I got to make sure my teacher has the right certifications for that. Or do they need to go to a self-contained class, whether that's a behavior class, whether that's a PSI class? What does that look like? Sometimes we have to send kids to a separate school. If you are making a decision from 5 on down, you got to call me. 5 and 6, you got to call me, okay? If you think you're going to send a kid to a separate school that is not a HISD school, then that has to go through me. We don't go to the ARD and then say, Ms. Vincent, I placed a kid over here at Monarch for $300,000 a year. Because if you do, I'm going to say, okay, you got that $300,000 because I didn't plan it in my budget and we didn't have a discussion. Okay, and I've already talked to your EDs about that. Like, if you're going to place someone in a separate school, not saying you can't, because there are times, but then you got to have that staffing and you got to let me know, because I have planned in my budget when those cases come up, but I've planned a certain amount of money, just like you all have on that. So I gotta be in front of that.
So I have a question. When a student is coming from outside the district and they were previously in a alternative placement, like at an ABC West, so they came from Fort Bend and they were already there.
Then call your director immediately and we'll work through that. But yes, if a kid comes in a placement, we either have to accept the placement, just like any other scenario. We have to say, okay, we can implement the IEP as written, or we need to go back to ARD, okay, and conduct an ARD. So if you get a kid in that situation, you phone your friends to help you out, and we'll walk you through that. Okay, because we need to know about every kid that's not going to be on a HISD campus in my office, okay? All right. This determination has to happen annually. Let's say we do need someone, someone needs to go to Harris County for some specific, we have to look at that annually. We don't just say, oh, you go for life, you know, you're over there. It's got to be based on the IEP. It has to be closest to the home. And then, of course, they're going to be with their non-disabled peers to the extent possible. And we have to talk about what are the impact and what are the harmful effects on that student. So if I pull you, what is the impact on those, what are the impact of those students? All right. We're at 9:15, I think, but I really want to speed through this. So you have you have a handout, and I think his name is Alex, isn't that his name, Alex? Okay, I want you to read through that real quick with your shoulder partner, and based on the information that you learned today, where do you think Alex should be educated at? So it looks like you all are wrapping up your reading, so get with your shoulder partner and talk about what do you think that student's placement would be, just based on what you read today. All right, does anyone want to take a shot at it? What do you think if this Alex was one of your students, and this was the information that you had been given in your ARD meeting, where do you think Alex should be educated?
Something that came up as we were discussing was thinking about the grade level he's in. He's in the 10th grade. So in 2 years, he'll be going out into the real world. And so what things are we doing in the class to make sure that he's prepared post-secondary? And I thought that was very valuable in the sense of, although these are the things he needs to work on in the immediate, what are those things that are going to be long-standing for him to be successful as an adult in the real world?
So I don't know if he just I'm not going to be able to regurgitate everything you said so eloquently, but he just said he's in 10th grade. And what are his plans after post-secondary? And that's a great question because you all are in middle school, and so all students with IEPs have to have what we call a transition plan in place by age 15 prior to their 15th birthday. So some of you are doing those, or you're special education teachers, where we have to say, okay, after I leave high school, this is what I want to do. You're also developing graduation plans, right? Individual graduation plans. And for students with IEPs, the IEP takes the form of the graduation plan. So that's great. All the things that you said, we should be looking at coursework. We should be looking at what the student said that they wanted to do post-secondary. Do they want to go to college? Do they want to go to barber school? What are their plans like? And then how do we help them get there? Anybody else have something to add? So we talked about what we would discuss. Where do you think Alex should receive his education?
General setting.
If we're looking at this chart, we're going to probably look at general education as the least restrictive environment and take data. We're going to develop IEP goals around what? What are his areas of need? Someone said reading comprehension goals. We're going to individualize his accommodations based on Alex's need, because we have STAR scores, we have NWA MAP scores, we have our teacher work that we're looking at. Previous goals and objectives, if he's already been in special education, how has he done on his previous goals and objectives? Those are all the things that we're taking into consideration when we make this last call. Why do you think it's really important that we get this right? His life. Guys, I have a child with a disability, and I tell people all the time, when you leave high school, there is no special ed line at Walmart. Like you use the app, you learn how to use a calculator, you learn whatever the skills are, but it's about life after high school, when our goal is regardless, all students on IEPs are able to function as independently as possible. So what happens a lot of time when we get in these most restrictive environments? What happens?
You stay.
I'll point something out. So on this as well, and I know especially middle school, if you notice at the very end, what does it talk about in that last sentence? The last sentence on the example. Social, right? And while we often want to focus on the academic piece, right? Because how are we judged as principals? Academic success, right? But you know for sure in middle school, right? All the little odd kids running around the middle school not knowing who they are, right? What really is going to matter for that kid? If the academics, if he starts peaking, what's going to push him over the edge, or her?
Social.
Some of those social interactions. What's going to keep them from reaching their potential? The lack of social interactions, right? And if you want some student to behave, in this case like a 10th grader, who do you have to show them to behave like? 10th graders. So a lot of times those goals we overlook, especially as administrators, right? We get in there, we need to get out because we got things to do. And the academic pieces matter, but I would also really focus a lot on that social piece, because that's the other piece, right? They're not going to have somebody to go talk to when they graduate high school as much as what they do when they're in high school or middle school.
And same thing like when Mary Kay was talking about eligibility. A lot of times we don't see as many of our students leaving special education or being dismissed and saying, hey, you've achieved at this level. Kind of the same thing here. When we put our students in the most restrictive environment, then they don't have that access to those social skills and things that they may need in order to be successful. And so really taking these decisions to heart, because ultimately it's somebody's life. It's a child's life is in your hands. And so yes, we want to start with the least and go to the most restrictive, but also just taking it with really, did we do our best? Did we implement those accommodations with fidelity? Like they got them once a week, they didn't get them every day. That's not fidelity. Did I implement that behavior intervention plan with fidelity prior to moving them to a more restrictive environment? Those are the questions that we're going to be asking you. Those are the questions that you need to be asking yourself in your ARD committee meetings, is what have we done before we move them to this more restrictive setting. Now I'm going to turn it over to Mary Kay to close us out, because by now we're going to come to some type of consensus, or not.
All right, so we've developed this great IEP for the student. We have made sure that we're implementing goals, we've collected data, we've reviewed all of that. Now it comes time to agree or disagree. Ultimately, who has that responsibility? Who at the ARD committee has a responsibility to agree or disagree? Everyone. You and the parent, right? You and the parent, you are responsible for ensuring that you agree or disagree. It's the administrator and the parent. So the best laid plans, everyone agrees, right? The two of you agree. However, if the parent disagrees, what do? Well, there are some very important steps that we need to make sure that we get right. First of all, decisions about agreeing or disagreeing happen at the ARD table. okay? It is a misconception that I take the paperwork home and I get to wait 5 days or a month and I get to decide and I'll call you whenever I come up with my reason. If a parent does not agree at the table, treat that as a disagreement, right? They have rejected the IEP. Treat it as a disagreement. At that point, you need to make sure that you provide the parent with a copy of, first of all, the ARD paperwork when they leave the ARD meeting. They need to be provided with procedural safeguards and schedule that reconvene. You need to schedule that in Easy IEP while you're sitting at the table. Now, sometimes I know parents will say, hey, I need to look at my schedule, but we need to make sure that we do reconvene within 10 school days. That is our best, that's best practice. Now, if a parent says I can only do it on day 11, obviously we have to agree to the time. But if they don't agree at the table, treat it as a disagreement. And that has been something that we've not done well in this district. We've walked away from the table and said, oh, I'm going to go think about it. And many times our advocates will try to push us to that. No, we want to think about it. No, our decisions are made at the table, but that's so important and why we talked about before that you plan in advance. Parents need to have copies of that draft IEP. They need to know what the decisions are that they're going to be made because we want them to be participants in the ARD process. That is one of their rights and that's one of our responsibilities to ensure that. So nothing should be a surprise when we're sitting around a table with 10 or 12 people talking about their child, right? They should have been informed with progress monitoring. They should know that the student is struggling in reading. They should know that they've been to the office 4 times. None of that should be a surprise sitting at that table. And if they know in advance and we're proactive about our approach, we won't have problems with agreeing or disagreeing at the table because they already knew what was coming. Now, obviously it's a parent's right to disagree, but what we don't want to have them do is just leave, okay? So what do I do if the parent leaves? Come on, I've got my directors at the back. What do I do if a parent just walks out? I'm not agreeing or disagreeing. What do I do? Treat it as a disagreement. All right? Treat it as a disagreement. Wrap that ARD up, and you make sure you get them a copy of the ARD document along with the procedural safeguards, and try to reconvene that ARD. Bring them back to the table. Figure out what exactly is the concern that they're having. That may require an additional parent conference just to kind of hear, what their concerns are. But get them back to the table so that you can get an IEP in place for that student. All right, any questions about that? All right, you've been a great audience. Thank you for those Monday morning participants. We really appreciate you. I know it's been a rough, a rough month last week. So thank you all.